Picture this. I'm 22, trading small town vibes for college chaos. Think late night parties, a guy who flips my world, then breaks my heart. Back home, my dad's my rock. But one sweaty summer day, a single look changes everything. Hugs get weird, feelings blur, and just when I think I've got it figured out, boom, he drops a bombshell that rips my roots out from under me. What happened? Stick around to find out. I'm Emily, 22. And I grew up in this sleepy little town in Ohio where the biggest event of the year is the county fair. Life here moves slow. Think golden leaves crunching under your boots and neighbors waving from their porches. It's just me and my dad, David, in our small house with creaky floors and a kitchen that always smells like his famous meatloaf. Mom's been gone since I was 5, taken by a long illness. I barely remember her, but Dad, he's my everything. He's this tall guy with kind eyes and hands rough from years of construction work. He stepped up after Mom passed, becoming both parents rolled into one. Every night, he'd whip up dinner and we'd plop down to watch old sitcoms, laughing at the same jokes we'd heard a million times. That was my world. Safe, quiet, predictable. But by 19, I started feeling this itch. The town felt too small, like it was holding me back. I wanted more, something bigger, louder, brighter. So I packed a suitcase, hugged Dad goodbye at the front door, and headed off to college in Cleveland. That hug? Man, it was tough. I could feel the lump in my throat as I waved from the car, watching him shrink in the rear view, leaving his warm, steady world for the unknown. It was a rush and a panic all at once. I wasn't just stepping out of my comfort zone. I was leaping. Cleveland hit me like a freight train. The campus was alive, students rushing through hallways, the air buzzing with chatter and coffee fumes. I moved into a cramped dorm room with a view of towering brick buildings and a quad where people tossed frisbees like it was a sport. My roommates, Kate and Sophie, were a whirlwind. Kate's this loud, curly-haired girl who talks a mile a minute, and Sophie's the chill one with a knack for throwing killer parties. They were nothing like the folks back home. First week in, I was buried in textbooks, trying to keep up, when Kate burst through the door, waving a bottle of lemonade like it was a trophy. "Emily, enough with the nerd vibes, let's hit the town," she yelled. I laughed, half nervous, half excited, and said, "Okay, fine, but I'm not dancing." Famous last words. That night, they dragged me to a bar off campus. The place was packed, music thumping, lights flashing, people shouting over each other. It was chaos, but the good kind. I stood there, wide-eyed, taking it all in. Sophie handed me a drink, some fruity thing that tasted like summer in a glass. "First one's on me," she winked. I took a sip, the sweetness cutting through my nerves. Kate grabbed my arm, pulling me into the crowd. "Loosen up, Em! This is college!" she shouted over the beat. I stumbled along, laughing despite myself. Before I knew it, I was swaying to the music, my shyness melting away with every step. Back home, I'd never have pictured this. My nights used to be about curling up with Dad, maybe sneaking an extra slice of pie while he pretended not to notice. Now, I was in this loud, colorful world where every day felt like a new adventure. Kate and Sophie's energy was contagious. They'd blast music in our dorm, sprawl across the floor with snacks, and talk about stuff I'd never even thought about. One night, Kate looked at me, mid-story about some wild party, and said, "You're different from when you got here, you know that?" I shrugged, but she was right. That small-town girl who'd shown up with a duffel bag and a nervous smile, she was fading fast. Still, it wasn't all smooth sailing. I'd call Dad every Sunday, his voice crackling through the phone, steady as ever. "How's my college girl doing?" he'd ask. I'd ramble about classes and friends, leaving out the late nights and that one time I tripped over a chair at the bar. He'd laugh, say, "Sounds like you're living it up." And I'd feel this pang, like I was leaving him behind. Was I? I pushed the thought down, told myself this was growing up. But deep down, I missed those quiet evenings, the way he'd hum off-key while cooking. College was freedom, sure, but it came with a price I hadn't figured out yet. Looking back, I see it clear as day. That first step out was about chasing something bigger, but it also meant letting go of something I didn't even know I'd miss so much. If I could tell my 19-year-old self anything, it'd be this. Enjoy the ride, but don't forget where you started. Freedom's awesome, but roots? They're what keep you grounded when the world starts spinning too fast. Kate once asked me, "You ever think you'll go back to that little town for good?" I smirked and said, "Maybe when I'm old and boring." She laughed, but I wondered, could I ever really leave it all behind? That first taste of college life? It was like opening a door I couldn't shut. I was hooked, scared, thrilled, all at once. And trust me, that was just the beginning. Life was about to throw me some curves I never saw coming. But right then, standing in that bar, drink in hand, music pounding in my chest, I felt alive. I had no clue what was next, but I was ready to find out. Or at least I thought I was. College was my new rhythm, and I was loving it. Cleveland's energy had me hooked. Late nights with Kate and Sophie, dancing in crowded bars, laughing till my sides hurt. I'd traded Dad's meatloaf for greasy pizza slices and swapped quiet evenings for playlists blasting through our dorm. It felt like I was finally waking up, shedding that small-town shell. But then, bam. Life threw me a curveball that hit harder than I expected. It started at Sophie's party, one of those backyard bashes with a bonfire crackling and solo cups everywhere. I was sipping something fruity, chatting with folks, when this guy caught my eye. Nick. He had this messy dark hair and a grin that made my stomach flip. We ended up by the fire, him teasing me about my love for cheesy old movies. "What, you're telling me you'd pick Back to the Future over a night out?" He laughed. I fired back, "Every time, it's got heart." He smirked, and we clicked. Before I knew it, he texted me later. "You're too cute for this loud crowd." My heart did a little dance. We started messaging nonstop. Dumb jokes, late-night chats about dreams. I was falling, fast. For weeks, it was magic. Nick had this way of making me feel seen, like I wasn't just some small-town newbie. We'd grab coffee between classes, and he'd nudge me with his shoulder, saying stuff like, "You're gonna take over the world, Em." I'd blush and shove him back, grinning like an idiot. I thought, maybe this is it. My first real shot at something big, something exciting. Love, or at least the start of it, was creeping in, and I let it sweep me up. Then came the crash. Another party, this time at some off-campus house. Music thumping, lights low, the usual vibe. I was looking for Nick. I'd texted him earlier, and he said he'd be there. I spotted him across the room, laughing, his arm slung around some girl I didn't know. Too close, too easy. My chest tightened like someone had punched me. I stood there, frozen, watching them giggle like I didn't exist. The drink in my hand felt heavy. The noise turned to static. Before I could think, I bolted outside, cold air slapping my face. Tears stung, and I didn't even try to stop them. Kate found me on the curb, shivering in my jacket. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, sitting next to me. I pointed back at the house, voice shaky. "Nick, he's with someone else." She hugged me tight, her voice firm. "He's a jerk, Em. You're worth way more than that." I nodded, but inside, I was a mess. My first taste of heartbreak, and it sucked. I kept replaying it, his laugh, her smile, wondering what I did wrong. Was I too naive? Too trusting? I wiped my face and muttered, "No more guys, I'm done." Kate squeezed my shoulder. "Good call. We've got you." That night shifted something in me. I'd jumped into college head first, all starry-eyed, and now I was spitting out the bitter end. Nick didn't even text me after, just ghosted like it was nothing. I threw myself into school instead, hitting the books hard, hanging with Kate and Sophie more. They'd drag me out still, but I kept my guard up. One night, over cheap tacos, Sophie asked, "You okay after that Nick mess?" I shrugged, picking at my food. "Yeah, just lesson learned, you know? Can't trust everyone." She nodded. "Smart. Plenty of fish out there anyway." I laughed, but it felt hollow. Looking back, I see it clear now. That moment wasn't just about Nick. It was my wake-up call. I'd been chasing this shiny new life, thinking it'd all fall into place. But real world? It's messy. You can't just dive in blind and expect it to work out. I told Kate once, "I thought college was gonna be all fun and freedom." She snorted. "It is, till it kicks you in the teeth." She was right. Fun's great, but it's the tough stuff that teaches you who you are. Still, I didn't let it break me. I kept dancing with my girls, kept laughing, kept showing up. But Nick left a mark, a little crack in that wide-eyed trust I'd carried from home. I started wondering, how do you balance letting people in without getting burned? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was figuring it out, one step at a time. And man, was I glad for Kate and Sophie. They were my lifeline when I felt like sinking. By the end of that semester, I wasn't the same Emily who'd waltzed into Cleveland all giddy and green. I was tougher, sharper, maybe a little bruised. Heartbreak's a brutal teacher, but it's real. If I could go back, I'd tell myself, feel it, learn from it, move on. Life's too short to let one jerk dim your spark. And trust me, that spark? It was still there, flickering, ready for whatever came next. Summer hit, and Cleveland went quiet. The dorm emptied out. Kate and Sophie headed off to their hometowns, and I was left staring at my packed bags. After Nick's mess, I'd toughed it out, kept my head up, leaned on my girls, but I was ready for a break. So, I hopped a bus back to my little Ohio town, watching the city fade into cornfields. Pulling up to our house felt like stepping into a time capsule. Same creaky porch, same faded mailbox. Dad was inside, sprawled on the couch, eyes glued to a baseball game. I grinned, dropped my bag, and decided to mess with him. Tiptoeing across the room, I got right behind him and clapped his shoulder. He jumped like I'd shocked him, then spun around laughing. "You little sneak," he said, pulling me into a bear hug. I hugged back, breathing in that familiar mix of sawdust and soap. Man, I'd missed this. We settled in like old times. That night, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, I spilled about college, classes, parties, the whole vibe. I skipped the Nick drama, just said I'd met some interesting people. Dad listened, nodding, his eyes crinkling with a proud smile. "Sounds like you're owning it, Em," he said. I grinned, but then I really looked at him. At 47, he was still solid. Broad shoulders, arms toned from hauling lumber, a little gray sneaking into his hair. In his plain tee, he looked different. Not just Dad, but a guy who'd held it all together for me. Something clicked, like I was seeing him for the first time. He caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What's up, kiddo?" I fumbled. Nothing, just zoning out." But my head was spinning. What was this feeling? Next day, the heat was brutal, sticky, thick, like the air was hugging me too tight. I parked myself in front of a fan, but it barely helped. Sweat dripped down my back, and I was dying. Dad had gone to town for errands, so I figured I'd cool off. I hit the shower, letting cold water blast over me. It was heaven, every drop washing away the grime and that lingering college chaos. I stood there, eyes closed, just soaking it in. Then I heard a creak. My eyes snapped open, and there was Dad standing in the doorway, grocery bag in hand. He must have come back early. The door was half open, and he was just there, staring. His face was all shock and confusion, like he'd walked into the wrong house. My heart slammed against my ribs. Water roared in my ears, but the silence between us was louder. "You're back early," I managed, voice shaky. He blinked hard, stammered, "Sorry, didn't know you were, yeah," and bolted out of there fast. I stood frozen, water dripping, my mind racing. What just happened? I grabbed a towel, wrapped it tight, and stepped into the hall. The heat hit me again, but now it was nothing compared to the weird buzz in my chest. I padded into the living room, where Dad was on the couch, pretending to watch the game. His shirt clung to him, damp from the humidity, and he wouldn't look at me. I plopped down next to him, closer than usual, testing the air. "So, everything okay?" I asked, keeping it light. He nodded too quick. "Yeah, fine, just caught me off guard." His voice was tight, and I saw his hands flex on his knees. Something electric hung between us, sharp and unspoken. I couldn't let it go. "You saw me, huh?" I said, half teasing, half curious. His eyes flicked to mine, wide and intense, then away. That's... It's weird, okay?" he muttered. But I didn't back off. I don't know why. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was me still figuring myself out. But I reached out, touched his arm. He tensed, then softened, and suddenly he pulled me into a hug. Not the usual dad hug. This one was tight, fierce, like he was proud of me growing up so fast. We stayed like that, my cheek against his shoulder, his breath warm on my hair. My pulse was all over the place. "This is normal, right?" I whispered, mostly to myself. He didn't answer, just held on. Pulling back, I caught his eye. There was something there. Confusion, sure, but also this quiet warmth I hadn't noticed before. "You're still my rock, you know that?" I said, smiling to cut the tension. He chuckled, shaky. "Always am." We sat there, game droning in the background, and I thought, what's going on with me? Back in Cleveland, I'd learned to guard my heart after Nick, but this was different. Not some crush, it was deeper, messier. Was I just missing home that bad? Or was I seeing Dad in a whole new light? Later, alone in my room, I replayed it all. That hug, that look. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't simple either. I'd changed out there in the world, and coming home showed me how much. Dad's always been my anchor, but now I wondered, can you outgrow the people you lean on? Or do they grow with you? I didn't have answers, but one thing hit me hard. You don't really know someone till life shakes things up. And trust me, things were shaking. That summer back home turned into something I never saw coming. After that weird shower moment with Dad, the air in our little Ohio house got thick. Not with tension, but with something else. We'd sit on the couch, closer than before, trading stories like always. But now every laugh, every glance, felt loaded. Down next to him, our knees brushing, and asked, "You ever miss how simple things used to be?" He looked at me, eyes soft but sharp. "Sometimes. But you growing up? That's worth it." I smirked, nudging him. "Even when I'm a pain?" He chuckled. "Especially then?" Then he hugged me. Tight, warm, different. My heart did this flip I couldn't explain. "You're still my girl, Em," he said, voice low. I nodded against his shoulder, but my head was screaming, what's happening here? Days rolled by, and it got worse. Or better, depending how you look at it. We'd cook together, elbows bumping in the kitchen, and I'd catch myself staring at him, his strong hands chopping onions, that easy grin. One afternoon, he came in from mowing the lawn, sweaty and grinning, and I handed him a glass of water. Our fingers brushed, and he froze for a split second, eyes locked on mine. "Thanks, kiddo," he said, but his voice cracked. I laughed it off, but inside, I was a mess. This wasn't just me missing home. It was bigger, scarier, and I couldn't shake it. I'd lie awake at night, replaying every moment, asking myself, is this normal? Am I losing it? It hit a peak one evening. We were on the porch, sun dipping low, crickets chirping. I scooted closer, resting my head on his shoulder. "You're the best, you know that?" I said, half joking. He went quiet, then wrapped an arm around me. "You're my world, Em." His grip tightened and I felt his breath hitch. My pulse raced. I reached up, touched his face, just testing the water. He didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned in, and for one wild second, I thought he might tease me like he used to. But he didn't. He just held me, and it was enough to make my chest ache. "This is okay, right?" I whispered. He nodded, but his eyes said he wasn't sure either. We didn't talk about it, but we didn't have to. The house turned into our bubble. Every look, every hug, stitched us tighter. I stopped thinking about Nick, college, all of it. This felt realer. One morning, he caught me humming while flipping pancakes and said, "You're different since you got back." I grinned. "Good different?" He nodded. "Yeah, stronger." I glowed at that, but part of me wondered, stronger or just more confused? I'd learned to guard my heart out there, but here? I was wide open and it freaked me out. Summer flew, and soon I'd have to head back to Cleveland. The night before I left, we sat at the table, quiet. I broke the silence. "I don't want to go." He smiled, sad. "You've got big things ahead, Em." Don't let me hold you back. I grabbed his hand. You don't. You never could. He squeezed back, and we hugged. Long, hard, like it might be the last time. Take care of yourself, he said, voice rough. I nodded, throat tight, and left the next morning, waving as the bus pulled away. His figure shrank, but that feeling? It stuck. Back at school, I couldn't shake it. Kate noticed right off. You're all glowy. What's up? She teased. I shrugged. Just home stuff. But it wasn't just that. I'd crossed some line I didn't understand, and it hit me. Emotions are wild. They pull you in, lift you up, but man, they can mess with your head. I started thinking, what's worth holding on to? Dad's always been my rock, but this closeness? It taught me you can love someone so much it blurs everything else. I told Sophie one night, feelings are tricky. You think you've got 'em figured out, then bam, they flip the script. She laughed. Tell me about it. Just don't let 'em run you off a cliff. Smart advice, but I was already teetering. Looking back, I'd tell myself, don't dive so deep you lose sight of shore. Love's awesome. Family, friends, whatever. But it's gotta leave room for you to breathe. I thought I'd learned that with Nick. But this was a whole new lesson. Keep your head clear, hold tight to what matters, and don't let a moment sweep you away. That's what I carried into my next semester, ready to balance it all. Or so I thought. A week later, my phone buzzed. Dad. Hey, Em, got some news, he said, voice shaky. I braced myself. What's up? He paused, then dropped it. I'm moving. Got a job offer in Texas. House is going on the market tomorrow. My stomach dropped. The house? Our house, my anchor, was gone? Just like that? I choked out, what? Why didn't you tell me? He sighed. Didn't want to mess up your summer. It's time for a change. I hung up, staring at the wall, tears spilling. Everything I'd clung to, him, home, us, it vanished in one call. I was unmoored, lost, and the line went dead. If you loved this, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, drop a comment, and pass it along to your buddies. This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.